There's a kind of pain that doesn't have a name when you're young. You just feel it in your chest. You feel it when you get a good grade and no one looks up when you cry and no one comes when your eyes search the room for someone who might notice the heaviness you can't explain, and no one does. This is emotional neglect. Unlike abuse, which is loud and visible, emotional neglect is quiet, invisible. It hides inside the moments that never happen, the hugs you didn't receive, the affirming words that never came, the soft gaze of understanding that never met your eyes. You may not remember a single moment where you were overtly mistreated, but you can still grow up feeling unseen, unfelt, and untouched emotionally. As a child, you don't know how to explain this. You don't have the language for emotional absence, so you make sense of it the only way a child can. You believe it's your fault. You start to think that if no one sees you, maybe you're not worth seeing. Maybe if no one listens, your feelings must not matter. Maybe if no one really connects with you, it's because you're too much or not enough. Carl Jung once said, "Shame is a soul-eating emotion." This is where shame begins for many emotionally neglected children, not because of something they did, but because of the consistent aching absence of validation. When your emotional world is never mirrored, you begin to feel ashamed for having emotions at all. This kind of pain doesn't fade easily. It settles in your body. It shapes the way you speak to yourself. You become cautious with your needs. You apologize for your presence. You learn to anticipate rejection before it happens, so you never have to feel the sting of disappointment again. You might even begin to find comfort in being overlooked, because at least then, no one can reject what they never noticed. What's most confusing is that on the surface your childhood might have seemed fine. Maybe there was food on the table. Maybe your caregivers worked hard. Maybe they believed they were doing their best, and maybe they were. But emotional neglect doesn't require cruelty. It just requires consistent disconnection, a parent who doesn't ask how you feel, who doesn't pause to understand your inner world, who looks right past the tears in your eyes because they don't know how to hold them. It's not always intentional, but it's still impactful. Jung believed the self, the whole integrated core of who we are, needs mirroring to develop. A child becomes real, not by existing alone, but by being seen in their wholeness. Without that reflection, the self fractures. Parts get buried, feelings go dormant. You start to split into who you really are and who you think you need to be. Over time, the distance between those two selves can become so wide, you start to forget which one is real. You might become the funny one, the strong one, the achiever, the helper, all in an attempt to receive the kind of attention you missed. But deep down, the child inside you still wonders, would anyone love me if I stopped trying? Emotional neglect teaches you to trade truth for belonging, to smile when you want to cry, to nod when you feel confused, to work harder when you're already exhausted. It teaches you to suppress your instincts in favor of pleasing others. It creates a wound that whispers, you don't matter unless you're useful, impressive, or invisible. That's why it still hurts, because no matter how much you accomplish as an adult, there's a part of you that's still waiting for someone to finally notice the tears you never shed, the joy you never got to share, the fear you held alone, and the very human innocent need to be held emotionally by someone who saw you not for what you did, but for who you were. But here's the truth, that child is still alive inside you. They were not broken. They're just waiting, not for more approval, not for more achievements, but for someone to finally notice them. And that someone now can be you. Jung taught that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Emotional neglect becomes unconscious because it's the absence of something, but it still lives in you. It shapes how you see the world, how you respond to rejection, how you cope with silence, how you interpret love. Unless it's faced, it quietly rules your choices. The wound of being unseen is not healed by becoming more. It's healed by remembering that you were always enough, not because you earned it, but because you were here, because you felt, because you existed. The first step in healing isn't to fix yourself. It's to see yourself, to sit with the child who waited, to hold space for what was never held, to offer the gaze you never received, and to say without flinching, you matter. I see you. You were always worthy of love. That's where healing begins, not in noise, not in doing, but in the quiet, sacred act of being seen. When a child isn't seen, They don't simply disappear. They adapt. The psyche doesn't just lie down in the face of emotional starvation. It finds a way to survive, and often that survival depends on becoming someone else, someone more acceptable, someone safer, someone more lovable. This transformation happens quietly without conscious thought. It begins the moment a child realizes their authentic self doesn't invite connection, that their tears lead to silence, that their excitement goes unnoticed, that their fear is too inconvenient. So they start reaching for whatever mask will finally make them visible. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, the version of ourselves we present to the outside world, not because it's who we are, but because it's who we believe we need to be, to stay connected and safe. Jung warned that while the persona is a necessary part of social life, it becomes dangerous when we mistake it for the totality of who we are. When we wear it for too long, it fuses with our identity, and we forget what's underneath. This is exactly what happens to the emotionally neglected child. They become what the environment demands or rewards, and over time, these roles become internalized as truth. We stop realizing their roles at all. Some children step into the archetype of the hero. They learn that achievement brings attention, and attention feels like love. So they strive, they overperform, they become hyper-responsible, they grow up too fast. Their worth becomes attached to how much they can do, how well they can do it, and how effortlessly they can carry others. But beneath their strength is a question they never speak aloud. If I stop achieving, will I still matter? Others become the caretaker. They learn to read every emotional cue, to anticipate needs before they're expressed. They become the helper, the fixer, the one who holds everything together. They derive a sense of identity from being needed, because if they're not needed, they feel invisible. They rarely ask for help. They rarely express need because they were conditioned to believe their emotions were less important than everyone else's. And then there's the invisible one, the child who decides, maybe not consciously, that it's safer not to be seen at all. They shrink their presence. They soften their voice. They become easy to overlook, and that becomes their comfort. They suppress their desires, numb their emotions, and fade into the background, not because they don't want connection, but because they've given up hope of finding it. These archetypes are not weaknesses. They are strategies, brilliant, adaptive, and deeply tragic strategies. They are how a young psyche preserves itself when real emotional connection feels unreachable. Jung understood this deeply. He believed that the psyche develops patterns in response to trauma and deprivation, and these patterns form archetypal identities that we continue to carry into adulthood. He once said, every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism. For many of us, these archetypes become addictions, habits of personality that we cling to because they once worked. But eventually, they stop working. They start to hurt. They begin to imprison us because underneath every emotionally starved archetype is a hidden truth: we were trying to be loved without ever being known. And that's a deeply lonely place to live. You see, the hero may look strong, but they're often exhausted. The caretaker may seem generous, but they're often depleted. The invisible one may appear peaceful, but they're often aching for someone to truly see them. These personas help us survive, yes, but they also keep us from healing, because healing requires truth. It requires us to look behind the mask and ask, who was I before I needed to become someone else? What did I silence in myself just to belong? Jung taught that the path to individuation, the path to wholeness, requires confronting these false selves, not with blame, not with shame, but with tenderness, with understanding. Because these roles, as painful as they are, once protected us. They were shields. But a life lived behind a shield is a life half-lived. The emotionally starved archetype is not a flaw in your personality. It's a map, a clue, a signpost pointing back to the place where something vital was missing. If you follow it with honesty and care, it can lead you back to the self, the real you, the one who existed before the performance began. So take a moment, breathe, reflect. Ask yourself, what role did I play to feel safe? Who did I become to earn attention? What part of me was hidden so that I could be accepted? You don't need to abandon these roles overnight. They were part of your survival. But you do need to realize they're not who you are. They're not the destination. They were never meant to define you, because your worth was never supposed to come from what you do for others, how strong you appear, or how invisible you can become. Your worth is rooted in your presence, just as you are, without the mask. Emotional neglect doesn't stay in childhood. It carries itself forward quietly, subtly, until it begins shaping how you live, how you think, how you love. It follows you not as a loud trauma, but as a lingering silence, a hidden hunger, a sense that something is always missing even when life looks full. You grow up. You move on. You tell yourself the past is over. But then you catch yourself in the same patterns. You over-apologize when you haven't done anything wrong. You feel selfish just for having a need. You suppress your feelings because you don't want to be too much. You work twice as hard as others, not because you're ambitious, but because you're afraid of being perceived as lazy or not enough. These are not random behaviors. They are echoes of a time when your emotions were not mirrored, your thoughts not welcomed your presence, not deeply engaged with. So now, in adulthood, your body still waits for the validation it never received. Your nervous system is still wired for survival. Your inner world still braces for disconnection. Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." That's what emotional neglect does. It creates a kind of inner exile. You're there, but not touched, feeling, but not felt alive, but not fully known. This creates a loneliness that no crowd can solve. This hunger shows up in ways you may not even recognize. Maybe you keep yourself constantly busy, not because you love productivity, but because stillness feels unbearable. Maybe you overcommit and overdeliver because saying no brings guilt you can't explain. Maybe you seek perfection because if you can't be loved for who you are, you hope at least you'll be accepted for how well you perform. It can also show up in the way you relate to yourself. You might have a harsh inner critic that mimics the silence of your childhood, constantly questioning your worth, constantly demanding more. You might have trouble identifying what you even feel because you were never taught how to name or hold emotions safely. You might feel empty after receiving praise, disconnected after achieving something important, and unsure why the high never lasts. Emotional neglect doesn't just starve the heart. It confuses the mind. It teaches you that emotions are private, messy, or burdensome, that vulnerability is dangerous, that your needs are optional. Without realizing it, you start living in a constant state of self-abandonment, always showing up for others, rarely showing up for yourself. And the worst part, on the outside you may look completely fine, successful, composed, high-functioning, but inside there's a quiet grief, a longing that has no name, a hunger that achievement can't feed, a sadness that rest can't touch. Jung believed that much of our suffering comes from what we avoid, that we suffer not just from our wounds, but from our attempts to outrun them. He wrote, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." In other words, we create patterns, overwork, overthinking, overgiving, to distract from the pain we never got to process. If you've been emotionally neglected, you may have built a life of performance. You show up as the capable one, the helpful one, the funny one, the independent one. But inside, you might still feel like a child holding a bowl that was never filled. No matter how much you give to others, your own bowl stays empty. This hunger is not weakness, it's not neediness, it's human. You were born needing connection, needing to be seen. If those needs weren't met, they didn't disappear, they simply went underground. They became the silent architects of your choices, your relationships, your self-image. But here's the truth. This hunger is not a flaw, it's a signal. It's your psyche's way of asking for reconnection, not with others, but with yourself, with the parts of you that were neglected, with the emotions you buried, with the voice you silenced just to survive. What you're truly hungry for isn't more validation. It's more truth, more presence, more permission to feel, to rest, to exist without constantly proving your worth. The emotionally starved child doesn't want applause. They want recognition. They want attunement. They want someone to finally look into their eyes and say, "I see you, I hear you, you matter." And now as an adult, you have the chance to give that to yourself. This is the turning point, when you stop reaching outward for what you didn't receive. When you pause, turn inward, and begin the long, quiet work of offering yourself the attention you've always needed. Jung believed the path to wholeness required integrating the rejected parts of the self. Emotional neglect often causes us to reject the most tender, sensitive parts of who we are. Healing means bringing them back, not all at once, not in a rush, but slowly, gently, with compassion. The hunger you feel is not proof of brokenness. It's proof that you're still here, that the real you was never destroyed, only waiting, waiting to be found, waiting to be fed, waiting at last to be fully known. There comes a point when the very thing that protected you begins to imprison you. The mask that helped you survive becomes too tight, too heavy, too false, and you start to wonder, who am I underneath all of this? Jung warned of this very moment. He believed the persona, the outward identity we wear to fit in with the world, is useful but limited. It's like a uniform. It helps us function, connect, and contribute. But it's not the whole truth of who we are. He said, the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. When you've been emotionally neglected, that persona forms early and solidifies fast. You learn that certain parts of you are more acceptable than others. You learn that being capable earns praise, that being quiet earns peace, that being helpful earns a place. So you become those things not because they're your nature, but because they kept you emotionally safe. But over time, the mask sticks. It becomes harder to take off. You wear it so long you begin to believe it is you. You might say, I'm the strong one, I don't need help, but deep down you do. You might say, I'm just easygoing, but deep down you've learned not to express anger or desire. You might say, I like being behind the scenes, but deep down you've given up on being noticed. That's the trap. The persona becomes your personality. What once served you starts to suffocate you. The hero who always takes on more than they can carry becomes resentful but doesn't know how to stop. The caretaker who always shows up for others begins to feel invisible when no one shows up for them. The invisible one who prides themselves on needing nothing starts to feel numb to everything. You may even start to feel ashamed for wanting anything at all. Rest, attention, recognition. These don't fit the role you've been playing, so you keep them buried. You keep smiling. You keep performing. You keep coping with loneliness in silence. And then one day something breaks through. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's a quiet sadness you can't shake. Maybe it's a moment of clarity when you realize your life is full of things you never really chose, only accepted. That's when the question arrives. What if this isn't who I really am? Jung understood this crisis. He believed that real healing, real transformation, begins the moment you stop identifying with the mask, the moment you recognize that you are not your role, not your responsibilities, not your reputation. You are something deeper, something whole, something real. But unmasking is hard because the persona is safe. It's predictable. It keeps things orderly. Without it, you might feel exposed, vulnerable, even lost. That's normal. That's part of the process. Letting go of who you had to be can feel like a kind of death, but it also makes space for rebirth. This is where many get stuck. They want freedom, but they're afraid to let go of the identity they've spent years perfecting. They want to be seen, but they're terrified of being misunderstood. They want rest, but they fear the guilt that might follow. It's not that you don't want to be your true self. It's that no one ever showed you how to be that and still feel safe. So you default to what you know. You keep helping. You keep achieving. You keep disappearing. But deep down, a quiet voice keeps whispering, there must be more than this. And there is a life where you can be seen without performing, where you can rest without guilt, where you can speak your truth without fear, where you can ask for what you need and receive it. That life begins when you start peeling back the layers, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Not by tearing the mask away, but by newsletters loosening its grip. Ask yourself, when did I first learn that this role was safer than being myself? Who did I have to become to be accepted? What did I leave behind in the process? Your persona helped you survive a time when survival was necessary. Honor it for that. Thank it. But don't let it become a prison. You are not required to be who you were when you were trying to be loved. Jung wrote, we cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. So don't condemn the mask. Accept it for what it was. A coping strategy, a defense, a bridge between your inner world and a world that didn't always know how to hold you. But now, you're older, wiser. You can hold yourself differently. You can build a new bridge, one that doesn't rely on pretending, one that begins with presence, with honesty, with the quiet power of choosing to be whole, even when it feels unfamiliar. The moment you begin questioning the persona is the moment you begin returning to yourself. Beneath the roles, beneath the conditioning, beneath the fear, you are still there, the real you, the forgotten self, the one who never needed to earn love, only receive it. And now you're finally in a place where that can begin. Healing from emotional neglect is not a single moment. It's not a revelation, a breakthrough, or a dramatic transformation. It's a slow, quiet return, a return to parts of yourself you forgot you were allowed to have to feel to need. It's the unlearning of the belief that your worth was tied to what you could do instead of who you already were. Jung believed that true growth is not about becoming better, but about becoming more whole, more real. He called this journey individuation, the process of reclaiming your authentic self by integrating the parts you were once forced to leave behind. For those who were emotionally neglected, the parts that were exiled are often the most tender, the most vulnerable, the most human. To begin healing is to go back not in time, but inward. You return to the place where you stopped trusting your own feelings, where you silenced your needs to avoid rejection, where you began wearing the mask that helped you feel safe. And you stand there this time, not as the child who was afraid, but as the adult who is ready to listen. The first step is noticing. Noticing when you perform, instead of express when you smile, to avoid discomfort, when you say you're fine, but you're not. These moments are not failures, they're invitations. Each time you catch yourself falling back into the role, the hero, the caretaker, the invisible one, you have a chance to pause and ask, what am I really feeling right now? What do I actually need? For many, this will feel foreign at first. Emotional neglect doesn't just suppress your voice. It disconnects you from your inner world. You might not know what you're feeling. You might struggle to name what you need. That's okay. Start there. Start by becoming curious. Start by sitting in the silence you once feared and asking yourself gently, what is surfacing right now? You don't need to fix anything. You just need to listen. Jung said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Awakening means allowing what was buried to rise again, not to overwhelm you, but to finally be held. Maybe you start writing down the emotions that feel unsafe to speak. Maybe you give your inner child a name, a voice, a seat at the table. Maybe you sit with discomfort, not because you enjoy it, but because you trust that truth lives there. Over time, something begins to shift. You start validating your own emotions without waiting for someone else to do it. You begin honoring your energy, your rest, your joy, not as luxuries, but as rights. You speak more honestly, even if your voice shakes. You create boundaries not to push people away, but to finally make space for yourself to exist. Reparenting yourself is not about perfection. It's about consistency. It's the quiet, daily act of showing up for the child who still lives inside you, the one who was never truly seen. You hold space for their sadness, their curiosity, their anger, their hope. And instead of judging them, you say, I hear you, I'm here, I won't leave. You begin to grieve, not because you want to live in the past, but because something real was lost. You allow yourself to mourn the connection that never came, the safety you had to create on your own, the emotional hunger that shaped your entire way of being. You grieve the effort it took just to feel enough. That grief, when you allow it, softens you. It clears a path. It makes space for something new to grow. In the place where you once performed, you now begin to live. In the space where you once suppressed, you now begin to express. In the silence where you once waited, you now begin to speak. You begin to feel more real, not more impressive, not more liked, just more real, more whole, more you. That's the gift of returning to the self. You stop trying to earn your place. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop contorting yourself to be digestible for others. You begin choosing yourself gently again and again. And when the old roles call to you as they will, you don't shame yourself. You recognize them for what they are. Survival patterns, old strategies, outdated defenses. You say, thank you. You acknowledge how they kept you safe, but you no longer hand them the pen. You're the one writing your story now. Jung said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. What you are becoming is not someone better, but someone truer. I hope this video was helpful. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts or experiences. Thanks for watching.